What's up, everybody? So in this video, we're going to be talking about the placenta, this very important part of pregnancy, right? As we can see, this right here is the placenta, and there's love, as always. So where do we even start? So the best way to understand how to approach the topic of the placenta is here. So we know it all starts with a man and a woman, right? A man, Eminem here, and the woman, Miley Cyrus, right? The man has the male reproductive system, which is basically specialized to make a special kind of cell called a sperm. Now the female is the opposite. It makes a special cell called the egg. Now when the sperm and the egg meets, that will eventually duplicate and it'll form a cell that will duplicate and duplicate to form a baby, right, in pregnancy. Now pregnancy, the process by which this baby is being formed after the sperm and the egg met, this placenta is a little part that's very important in allowing pregnancy to happen successfully, okay? So if you don't know what spermatogenesis is, what oogenesis is, fertilization, or what pregnancy is, I made a video on each of these, and that's why I have a little sun here, okay? So in this video, we're just going to be talking about the placenta. So let's get started. Now here we have a picture, right? Now this picture is basically looking at the side view. It's the side view, very important, of a female, right? So we are looking at from the side, and we can see the inside of the body. So to give you an orientation, here we have the spine. So this is obviously the butt, the back. Okay, in front of the spine, we have this pipe here, which leads to the butthole. So this is your large intestines or your rectum, right? Now in front of that, well, let's go to the very front. If you press in the front of yourself, if you're a female, you'll feel a hard spot. This is your pubic bone. Now behind your pubic bone, there's the bladder, right? And this actually makes sense because sometimes when you've been keeping your urine in for a long time, like you haven't peed in a while, and you press above this bony spot, you will feel like peeing really badly. That's because you're pressing on this bladder, forcing the pee to want to come out, right? So this right here is where the pee actually leaves. Now, very close to the bladder, kind of like here, is the uterus, okay? Or this is the female reproductive system. The uterus here, the fallopian tube, the ovary, right? This whole female reproductive system. And we can see it connects to this vagina, this pipe here, which connects with the outside, right? That's why this whole area is like kind of the outer part. So both the bladder exits here, and also the uterus exits, okay? Now, what am I getting at? We care a lot about this organ, right? This is the female reproductive system. Now, let's label some parts about the female reproductive system because that will make understanding the placenta a lot easier. So here we're basically looking now at this female reproductive system from the front. Okay, so here we are from the front. Let's slice it open and label quickly some names, and this will all help kind of clarify things a lot, in my opinion. So let's slice it open. So now we're looking at what's going on. Some key things to label. I'm just not gonna rush over this one. So again, here, I'll kind of explain this as the stuff happens. So let's say here, actually, let's start here. What's this right here? This is your ovary, right? The ovary, as we've learned before, is a place where the egg is made. So here we have an egg. So the egg is made in the ovary, right? In oogenesis, and it's gonna be released into this pipe, which we call what? The fallopian tube, right? Let me quickly kind of make this easy. There. Fallopian tube or oviduct, right? And it's going to travel into this tube and kind of wait. It's going to wait for sperm, right? Sperm may come or it may not show up. It may enter and reach the egg or it may not, right? Depends on if the female is trying to get pregnant or not, right? So let's say here we have the egg. It's going to wait here. Meanwhile, the sperm is going to enter here through what? What do we call this? We call this the vagina, right? The vagina. Now, after it enters the vagina, it reaches this narrow area here called the cervix, and it's got to pass through that as well. So we call that the cervix, and then it reaches this empty space here called the uterus. This uterus is very important. You'll see why very shortly. Now, eventually, the sperm and the egg meet. They fertilize each other, and then something interesting is going to happen, and I'll show you this now. So let's say the sperm and the egg met. After they meet, they form this kind of cell. Okay, so we're now zooming in to the fallopian tube area. So it forms this kind of cell. This cell is the zygote. It's going to become the baby, or it is in a way the baby, right? But it's only one cell. So it's got to become a whole baby, which is billions of cells. So what happens is this cell will divide to form 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, so on until it forms a blastocyst, which is like around 100 to 200 cells. This blastocyst is going to come into this area here. Again, what do we call this area here? Called the uterus. Now, once it's in the uterus, it doesn't want to go in the middle of it. It wants to implant into this red thick membrane here, which we call the endometrium. The endometrium. You notice this little brown layer, that's the muscle. This is what contracts in females during a period, and that's the part that hurts. This is called the cramps. Comes from these muscles. But this layer right on the inner side of the uterus is called the endometrium, and it's very important. Why? Because this blastocyst is not going to go into the uterus. It's going to come into the uterus and implant into this layer. It's going to implant into the endometrium. Okay? So you may be wondering, okay, you're talking about all this stuff. Where's placenta? Trust me, I'm going to get there. And placenta will make so much more sense if I tell you this stuff first. So the blastocyst implants into here. And so this is basically the baby. It's a very, very small baby, but it's going to become a lot. But it needs nutrients. Look, it's a lot of cells. Without nutrients, it's not going to survive. So it implants into this endometrium because this endometrium has a lot of vessels that can supply nutrients to this blastocyst. So that's why it implants here. Okay, so the baby is going to come from this. Okay, but how do we make sure that this endometrium is stable? How do we make sure it's always there? Because why does it not just degenerate? It doesn't degenerate because of this. The blastocyst will make a molecule, this one here. Okay, let me bring it to the front. It will make this molecule called HCG, and I'll put it here for you. HCG. This molecule is going to travel in the bloodstream, and it's going to eventually reach the bloodstream in the ovary. And it's going to leave this bloodstream and tell this little guy here, which is the corpus luteum. It's the remainder, it's the leftover of what happened to make this egg. Okay, to make the egg, right? The egg was made, sperm fertilizes it, but it's the remainder of what made the egg. Now, it's very important. It's called the corpus luteum, and this HCG is going to tell this corpus luteum to stay alive. And that's very important because what this corpus luteum normally does is make two molecules, estrogen and progesterone. Okay, estrogen will make this blue triangle, and progesterone will make this yellowy one. Okay, so it makes these two things, and it sends them in the bloodstream. Now, they travel over here. They travel to the endometrium, and they tell the endometrium to grow more vessels, to become thicker, so that it can support this baby. Okay, so it's very important that this corpus luteum is very important. So the corpus luteum is kept alive by this HCG, right, that is made by this blastocyst. But we can't keep it alive forever. It will eventually die. And when it dies, we have no more estrogen. We have no more progesterone. So this endometrium will die. So we got to find a way after this corpus luteum dies to keep this endometrium alive. Otherwise, the baby will just not survive, and you'll have the pregnancy will not succeed. So after the corpus luteum, something has got to take its place, and that something is the placenta. So we're going to talk about that more now. And the placenta, where does it come from? Because it's not in a normal female. The placenta does not exist in a female that is not pregnant yet. So the placenta is going to come from this blastocyst. Both the baby and the placenta are going to develop from this blastocyst. Okay, and we'll see exactly how this is going to look like. So that makes more sense. So overall, the big idea, what you need to know is normally the corpus luteum makes estrogen and progesterone, which keeps this endometrium intact, which is important to keep the baby alive. But eventually this corpus luteum is going to die. It's going to grow old and die. And then something else needs to take its place to make these two important molecules. Otherwise, the baby will not survive. And that something else is going to be our placenta, which is made from this blastocyst, okay? So that's the big idea. If you can understand that, then it's already, most of the thing is done. So here we go. Here we see, again, it's a side view. Remember before we looked at this side view of no baby here, no nothing is happening yet. Now, we're looking at the very same picture. Here's the spine, here's the rectum, right? The bladder, pubic bone, same thing. But we can see a baby is forming here. Look at the small baby, and it's the small pipe there called the umbilical cord connecting to a little thing here on the side. This is the placenta. Okay, so the placenta already forms from a very young age. Okay, and we'll look at it a bit more detail. So here, if we look a bit later, so this is very early in pregnancy, right? But yeah, let me bring this out. Now we can see much later in pregnancy, there's this pipe connecting the baby to this little organ here that is attached to the uterus. Remember, if we have the uterus here, the placenta is kind of going to get stuck onto this wall, stuck on the endometrium with the baby. So if I come back here, we can see this placenta is attached to the uterus. The uterus is huge now, right? In this picture, it's very, very small. In this picture, it's very, very small. And in this picture, it's still very small. But then it gets expanded, it gets huge, and the placenta is attached to it with the umbilical cord connecting to the baby, okay? So that's where the placenta is. That's where it is. Now, next part. If we now look at this, so here we have a woman, right? And we have this huge uterus with the baby inside, and we've got this placenta, which is embedded into the endometrium, right? It's embedded into the endometrium. And then this umbilical cord that connects the baby to the placenta. Now, okay, great. So we know now where the placenta was formed. We know it's formed at the same time as the baby from this clump of cells called the blastocyst, right? We know both the baby and the placenta comes from this thing, right? Now, what does the placenta do exactly? It has two key roles, and here we have another picture. So you can see the umbilical cord and this whole mass, this whole thing that is implanted to the side of the uterus. Now, what does it do? Let's first talk about some characteristics. So it is, what kind of shape do you think this is, right? It's disc-shaped, more or less disc-shaped. How heavy do you think this is going to be? If you had to guess, it's about 1 kilogram. So it's fairly heavy, to be honest. It's quite a big thing. It's not small. So how wide do you think it is? From this side to this side, how big would you say that is? It's around 18 centimeters. So again, it's pretty big. But again, this is at the point where it's kind of fully developed, right? Because in the beginning, you can imagine, it's like if we have a baby this size, it's pretty small. But it's going to get bigger and develop as the baby does. So this is kind of talking about a full-size one. Now, the placenta has two very important functions. One and two, okay? So one is maternal/fetal blood exchange, and we'll talk about what this means. And secondly, it has endocrine functions, which again, we'll talk about what that means. But basically, it has two very important functions, and let's talk about them in detail each. Okay, so here we go. We're going to talk about the first one to start off, maternal-fetal blood exchange. What do I mean? Okay, so as the baby develops, right, it's not, the reason why the baby is not walking outside is because it's not developed yet. It doesn't have all the organs it needs. It's not completely ready to be a human yet, right? Which means it cannot function by itself completely. So, but it will have its own blood, right? The baby will have its own blood and its own stuff going on, right? But the baby cannot eat. It cannot get food from the environment. It cannot poop the food out into the environment like we do. We get food from the outside. We get our McDonald's, we eat it, and we poop it out into the toilet, right? But the baby cannot do that. So the baby has to act through the mother, right? It has to take food from the mother, and it has to make the poop and the pee go out through the mother, right? So the placenta is a little organ, a little thing that's going to be that barrier. It's going to be the thing that removes the waste from the baby and puts the nutrients and the fresh stuff from the mother into the baby. So it's like a little barrier. It's a little exchange system. Controls what's going on between the mother and the baby. That's the big idea. So, like I said, the baby has its own blood, right? And the mother has its own blood. We want to bring stuff from the baby's blood to the mother's blood, right? The waste, all the waste we want to transfer to the mother's blood so the mother can get rid of the waste. And we want to bring the nice nutrients from the mother's blood to the baby's blood, right? But what has been noticed is people's blood are not exactly the same. That's why you cannot just transfer your blood to your friend. It might kill him. It might actually kill him. If your body receives blood from another person, there's a big chance that your body will have an allergic kind of reaction. It will not be able to react. It will not be able to, it notices that the blood is from another person and it has a huge reaction, causing a whole destruction of all the blood cells, causing you to die. So this is important. This means that our baby's blood and the mom's blood cannot mix. The baby's blood has to be separated from the mother's blood. They can never come into contact. Otherwise, a destruction could happen and the baby or the mother could die, okay? So that's why you need very specific, when you do a blood transfusion or something and you're lacking a lot of blood and you need to get blood from someone else, it's very important that you get the right type of blood. Otherwise, you may die or it may not work properly. So blood's tricky, okay? People have different kind of blood, and that's why it's important to separate them. Now, my question then is, okay, so we want to get rid of the fetus waste and get new blood into the baby, but from the mother's blood, but yet they cannot touch. So somehow, without the blood from the mom and the baby getting into contact, we need the mom's blood to deliver stuff to the baby's blood. So my friend, that sounds complicated. So how do we do that? How does that work? How does the placenta... So the placenta is great because it's going to be an organ that's going to prevent the baby and the mother's blood from coming into direct contact, but still allowing the mom to transfer important things from her blood to the baby's blood, and the baby to transfer important things to the mom's blood, again, without them directly touching. So we'll see how that works. Before we see how it works, what are some things that the mother may want to bring to the fetus, or what are some things that the fetus may want to bring to the mother? Let's just list some things to see, because I'm talking about all these things that need to transfer, but what do I mean? What are some examples? So the mother, right, she eats food, right? So she's going to get nutrients into her bloodstream, right? She's going to digest it, bring it into her bloodstream to send to all her cells. Some of these nutrients like glucose, amino acids, which are used to make proteins, vitamins, minerals, all of these, the baby also needs to grow. So from the mother, she can send some of her glucose and stuff like that to the baby. But that's oftentimes actually why mothers get a bit hungrier in pregnancy, because she has to eat for two, right? She has to eat all her normal stuff, but also for the baby to survive. Now, the baby isn't breathing oxygen, right? It's not in contact with the outside world to get oxygen. So when the mother inhales oxygen and the oxygen goes into her bloodstream, some of that oxygen will go to the baby. Water, again, the baby cannot drink. So water will need to come from the mother. Hormones, we know hormones has many functions, right? Many functions. Look at this. These are two examples of hormones that have big functions that I just talked about. There are many other hormones in our body, many, and they're all going to be involved in helping us grow, like growth hormones, many things. Insulin, like there's many kinds of hormones that are going to help us develop into a proper human being. So the fetus needs it, okay? So the mother needs to deliver those hormones. Now, here's the bad part. Sometimes a mother can be not living so healthily, so she can drink a lot of alcohol, smoke a lot, do a lot of other kind of drugs. Now, just like these other healthy things that go into the bloodstream and go to the baby, these bad things can also go to the baby. So it's very important to be aware of that. Whatever the mother eats or drinks or smokes can go into the bloodstream and get transferred to the baby. It's very important to bear this in mind. And this can lead to a lot of malformation problems. The child may become mentally retarded or impaired or malformed, may not have all the limbs, may have some congenital problems, okay? Because these are not healthy things for development. They don't help development at all. They're toxic, right? So that's why they highly encourage moms not to do these things during pregnancy, right? Because afterwards or beforehand, it's all right. But during pregnancy, your baby is at huge risk. Now, just like viruses and bacteria and all of these things can come into our body and go into our bloodstreams and make us sick, the same way they can go into our bloodstream and go into our baby's bloodstream, make them sick. So a lot of the times mothers can get infected and the baby could die from it, okay? So that's also important. Okay, now what about the opposite view? Fetus to the mother. The fetus, right? When your cells make ATP or energy, as you've probably learned in some other chapter, carbon dioxide is a byproduct, right? This is a bad thing we want to exhale, going to get rid of, but the baby cannot exhale it. So it's got to send it into the blood and the mother's got to exhale it. Urea, this is formed when proteins get broken down, right? Proteins get broken down. Now again, it's a byproduct. It's toxic. We want to get rid of it. So go into the bloodstream, mother will pee it out. Again, water can get rid of, because if you have too much water, that's also a bad thing, right? Water can be good and bad. So it's important that water also gets the fetus also gets rid of water. HCG, that's just a hormone. And any other waste. These are just small examples I mentioned. There can be infinite amount of things that can be rid. Just memorize some of these key important things. Okay, so now we talked about the things that could go from the mother to the fetus and from the fetus to the mother through this so-called placenta that I've been talking about. Now, remember how I said that we want to do all these things, transfer all these things between the mom's and the baby's blood, but it cannot come into contact. And the thing that's going to allow that is the placenta. So how exactly does the placenta do that? Let's look here. So same picture. Now we're zooming into this area with the umbilical cord and the placenta. Okay, we're zooming into it to see how it works. Now look, so right here, what do we have here? This right here represents this kind of part here, the umbilical cord. Inside this umbilical cord, so the umbilical cord is like a little pipe. Inside this pipe, we have vessels, right? Vessels have blood inside them. So this vessels right here, in the umbilical cord, these right here that I'm pointing at right now, like in the umbilical cord and slightly in the placenta. So in the umbilical cord running into this placenta, so this whole thing is a placenta, by the way, we're zooming into it. So the vessels in the umbilical cord running into the placenta here, these that I'm pointing at, these are the fetus's vessels, the baby's vessels. Okay, so I'm going to put it here, fetus vessels. And these other vessels here on the outside, I mean on the, well, over here, not here. So these are the mother's vessels. So notice how they don't directly touch, okay? Look here. So the baby's vessels, they go into these little areas here, these little things, these little bags. But the mother's vessels are here. And notice how the mother's vessels end up leading into this huge cavity thing. We're going to label it now, so don't worry. This huge red area, and all her blood basically pools there, okay? But notice there's this barrier. Look at this little barrier, this little wiggly barrier that is separating the mom's blood from the baby's vessels. So there's a clear barrier in between the baby's vessels and this mom's vessels, right? They cannot touch each other. So let's go to another slide where I can label these things more clearly. So this is the same thing, placenta. So we can label the baby's vessels first, okay? Umbilical veins. So this will be the red ones. So this red one is an umbilical vein. Normally, all red in the diagrams, when you have a red vessel, notice how there's a red and a blue vessel. The red vessels are typically vessels that have a lot of nutrients in them. They're basically very fresh and healthy. They're very healthy. These have a lot of nutrients in them. And the blue ones are the opposite. They lack nutrients. They have waste in them, typically, okay? Now, here's the blue one. So this one has waste. So examples of the nutrients could be nutrients, oxygen. Now, vessels can be either a vein or an artery. We call it a vein. It's a bit tricky. We call it an artery when it goes away from the organism. So this will be an umbilical artery because it's going away from the baby. Because why? Because it has waste. So these blue vessels, are leaving the baby because they have waste in them. So we call them an artery for away. Let me put this here. Easy to remember. A for away and V, vein for towards, okay? So the artery, which has the waste, will go away from the baby. The vein, which is red because it has nutrients in it, the vein is not always red though, right? They're only red when they have nutrients in them. I'll show an example here of when the vein is actually blue. But just remember that we call it a vein when it goes towards an organism and an artery when it goes away from it, okay? Away from the heart. So the umbilical vein, again, has the nutrients and it's going to go towards the baby, right? Because we want the baby to have these nutrients. Whereas the umbilical artery is going to leave the baby. It's going to go away from the baby to the mother, to the placenta, which will go to the mother. Now, if we follow these vessels, right, they kind of are around here and they're in these little squiggly flobs. I don't even know how to call them. But we call these little like waggly bags, we call them chorionic villi. So it's a little bag. Okay, notice, right? So we call them chorionic villi, these little bags. Now, the bag has this membrane which like separates these baby's blood vessels from this huge pool of blood. Where does this huge pool of blood come from? So if we first look at these other vessels here coming from the mother, so these vessels, so remember this whole thing is the placenta, the baby's vessels run into it and the mom's vessels run into it. So the mom's vessels are running into it here. It runs into it. Now let's label the mom's vessels. So the blue one, again, blue means it doesn't have nutrients in it. Okay, so we're going to call it a vein, okay? Because it's going to go towards the mother, the vein for towards the mother, because it has waste in it. And then this red one, let me move this one, we can call the artery, because it's going to go away from the mother to the baby, right? Because it has a lot of nutrient. It's red. So it's going to go towards the placenta because it has a lot of nutrients, and then it's going to go into the baby's bloodstream, right? So we've got mother's vein, which has which will take, right, it has waste in it because it's taking the waste from the baby. We'll go over that just now. Now, let's look at the artery, the mother's artery here, right? It's going to bring a lot of nutrients to the placenta. And look, let's follow it along. Here we go. Oh, it branched into here. And then here it's empty. So the vein just suddenly opens into a huge pool, like when you fill up a swimming pool. So all this blood just directly pools into this huge area, right? So it's just a huge pool of blood. So this blood has a lot of nutrients in it, right? And these nutrients are going to be right here, separated from the baby's blood by this chorionic villi, right? So very clear now. We have the mother's blood here, we have the baby's blood vessels here, and we have this membrane separating it. So we can call it here, let me move this, the mother's pool of blood. Okay, so let's clarify things one last time here. So let's say here comes the mother's artery, right? It's got a lot of nutrients, so it's going to come into here. So we have a huge pool of blood now. Now we want this nutrients, all these nutrients and oxygen and stuff, to go into the baby's veins and into the baby's vessels. So what's going to happen is the nutrients will leave the mother's blood, cross this barrier, and go into the baby's blood. So the blood itself, the blood cells will stay here, but the things that the blood is carrying will leave and pass this barrier. In that way, the nutrients and waste can cross this barrier without the blood itself getting into contact with the baby's blood, right? Do you understand that? So the mother and the baby's blood do not actually touch, but they get so close that diffusion of the nutrients can happen across this membrane, this chorionic villi, into and out of the baby's blood. So let's say then here we have the mother's blood, right? And the nutrients will diffuse across this chorionic villi into the baby's what? The nutrients will go into which one? Into the vein, because it has nutrients. And then these nutrients will go all the way to the baby, and the baby will use it. Now, let's say the baby used all these nutrients, made a lot of waste. Now we will come back as this umbilical artery, which will go towards this placenta. Now, these waste will leave the blood and go into this pool of blood, and then into this blue one, this mother's vein, which carries the waste away from the placenta, from the baby, to the mother, and the mother can get rid of it, right? So that's the overall idea. That's the overall idea of what you need to understand about the placenta. It's a huge, awesome, very simple, actually very simple organ that helps separate the baby's blood from the mother's blood so that they don't come into contact. And it's the place where the mother's blood, but the mother's nutrients and all that can transfer to the baby, and the baby's waste can transfer to the mother's blood. So that's all it is. Now, that was the first function, maternal/fetal blood exchange. It has one more important function, endocrine function. Endocrine means hormone. So it has a hormonal function. It can secrete hormones. Hormones is just a small molecule that can allow a lot of things to happen in your body. It's like a little, kind of like money. It can just do things. It can tell things to happen. It can make a lot of things happen. Okay, so which two things does the placenta make? It makes two things, estrogen and progesterone. We saw both of these before. Remember how this guy here, the corpus luteum, made estrogen and progesterone, right? So I said after a while, it's going to degenerate and stop making these. But by the time it dies, the placenta would have been developed. Guess what? The placenta is going to do exactly that. So the placenta is the thing that's going to end up overtaking the job of the corpus luteum. In that way, the endometrium will survive and the baby will be able to develop properly. So essentially, the placenta just takes over the corpus luteum to make estrogen and progesterone. So real quick, what do these do again? So we already covered this one before, but we'll just restate it. Both of them maintain the endometrium, right? I just told you that. So they're both going to maintain this layer here to be able to supply the baby and keep it healthy, right? So that the baby doesn't die. What else? Estrogen can do one important, let's first talk about this one. Oh yeah, I can show you here a good image. I prepared it, forgot. So the endometrium normally, right, is very thin. Look how thin it is. But estrogen and progesterone help to thicken it up. Look, we're making it nice and thick now so that the baby can benefit as much as possible and get a lot of nutrients from this layer. Okay, so what else? The estrogen is going to do one other cool thing. it's going to increase mammary gland production. Guess what? You're pregnant, right? Normally during pregnancy, the female's breasts get larger because they need to produce milk. So this estrogen is the reason why the breasts get larger. They are going to increase the size of these milk glands, these mammary glands. Let me show you. So here we're looking from the side. So we're looking, you can see these are the ribs. This is the nipple in the front of the body. And here's the breast from the side. And we're seeing what's inside. There's a lot of fat, right? Breasts have a lot of fat in them, but they also have a lot of these glands. These glands, look at these little glands. They make milk. So if each of these glands increase in size, the breast will get bigger, right? And if the breast gets, these glands get bigger, it means they're able to make milk better and all these kinds of things. And the milk will eventually leave through these pipes all the way to the nipple, right, where the baby can get it from. So important, estrogen can increase mammary gland growth, can increase the size of these glands, make them make more milk to prepare for the baby. Now, progesterone can do another important thing. It can prevent uterine contractions. So normally, right, when you don't get pregnant, the female goes into her period and she starts getting cramps. That is uterine contractions. The cramps help to squeeze out all the blood and all the eggs and the whole egg that was made to restart the period, right? Because there was no pregnancy. But during pregnancy, you don't want these contractions. You want the baby to stay in here. You want all the nutrients and everything to stay in here. You don't want it to get squeezed out. So progesterone is going to prevent these contractions, right? That's why when you get pregnant, you don't get these cramps as a female. And another thing the progesterone does is it prevents another pregnancy. Progesterone is a very important molecule, and it prevents you from being able to get another kid. And that's very important. So when you're pregnant, you cannot get pregnant again. Like once you're pregnant with the baby, you cannot suddenly get another baby. You have to wait till this baby is born because progesterone is going to prevent you from getting another baby, which is very important. And right, these are secreted into the bloodstream and it can travel around the body. So that is it. So to real quick, just summarize, what you need to know is just how the structure looks like, okay? Where the placenta comes from, which is from this ball of cells here, the baby and the placenta comes from it. What the placenta does, the placenta takes over this corpus luteum to maintain pregnancy. It has two important functions, maternal fetal blood exchange and endocrine functions, right? And the two endocrine functions that you need to know include estrogen and progesterone. And you can just remember what estrogen and progesterone does. So that's all you need to know. Here's the IB question, just to show that if you know what I taught you, you're fine for the exam. In the placenta, many substances are transported across membranes. Explain the structure and role of placenta. So I'm just going to rush over this because you can read it by yourself. But you can see they talk about the structure, which we talked about. And they talk about the hormones that it makes. They talk about the exchange of between the mother and the baby. You can read it clearly and you see. You just need to list 8 of these things to get the marks. Look, if you count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's 12 things to say. If you just say 8 of these, you get full marks. So that's all. I hope this video made sense, and this is really all you need to know about the placenta.